I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get Diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Diversifused podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifused DEI Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. This episode is all about personal finance through a DEI lens. My guest speaker today is Matt Paradise. Matt is a renowned financial educator who is passionate about transforming lives. He has empowered over 100,000 people to improve their credit scores, pay off their debt, and save enough money to achieve their financial goals. As a highly sought-after speaker, he has taught people in all walks of life, from Harvard University's lecture halls to homeless shelters throughout the New England area. His unique programs have been featured in the Massachusetts State House, Fidelity Investments, the Department of Corrections, many nonprofits, and corporations large and small. So welcome, Matt, to Get Diversifused. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
It really is my pleasure. Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation before we started recording and look forward to our time together now too. Thanks, Andrea.
Me too. You are very welcome. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your story, and how you came to be a speaker and author?
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I came about being a speaker and an author on financial inclusion a circuitous way. And lots of twists and turns. I was born and raised in Connecticut, and I guess we'll skip ahead. I mean, I was born as a baby, and a whole bunch of stuff in the years that I don't fully remember. But eventually, by the time I hit 7th, 8th grade, started to get disenchanted with sort of the traditional path of this is exactly how life should go, and get a good education, get a job, and die. And I always wanted something.
That's one way to look at it, I guess.
And that's kind of how I felt like traditional academia, K-12 education really portrayed what was supposed to be. And I felt that there was something more, that there was something deep, intrinsically deeper as a human, and connecting beyond just sort of memorizing some different information. And I understand from an educational point of view, yes, there's some wiring of neurons and synapses, even if we don't remember all of those algebraic equations. However, I still thirsted for something more, something deeper than that traditional go to school, get a job, and well, a little bit realizing our own mortality. So curiosity nearly killed this cat. By the time I got into high school, drugs and alcohol were something that I dove deep into. I overdosed in my sophomore year of high school. I was sort of in and out of rehab a little bit. I have 2 younger brothers, and eventually my parents provided the ultimatum. I needed to get out or sober up and straighten up. And I decided at that time, drugs were more important. There's, for anybody who's ever been in the throes of addiction, and maybe it's not drugs, maybe it's not alcohol, maybe it's a process addiction. And there are so many.
There are.
A process addiction, just we can get sucked into and escape from our lives, everything from whether it's TV to sex addictions to gambling to all kinds of things. Drugs and alcohol were my escape. Eating, for sure, something that so many struggle with. So it was a rough road. I mean, I sold drugs. Eventually, the house where I was selling drugs out of with some other friends was raided several times by the police. I knew it was just a matter of time before death, jail, or insanity came, and moved to Massachusetts to get away from that life. Now, anybody who's ever had any type of problems or trouble and wanted to get away from it and moved, maybe they realized it, maybe not. I certainly did. Wherever we go, we're still there. Our problems go with us. Our mentality, our psychological perspectives, they're still the same. And for me, that was very much the case as well. So even though I did construction and a variety of different jobs, didn't do it very well, still kind of doing drugs and drinking, and was really just a crazy time. I was a teenager still at the time, 18 or so. So really those 4 years, 5 years through high school and after I dropped out of high school, it really just wasn't for me. And come to find out the last couple of years of while I was at school, I received 0 credit for because I skipped too many days. I showed up to hang out with friends and sell drugs or buy drugs and move on. So I wasn't really into spending another couple years after many of my friends who I grew up with graduated and moved on. So eventually, after moving to Massachusetts, somebody had reached out to me and here in the Boston area and really just introduced me to, it's a beautiful city. It's amazing. But he was a professional musician. We met, bonded over music and some other things, but he was in a Bible-based recovery group, chemical recovery, and really just had me come out to that. My perspective of the Bible was, a negative one, especially like growing up. The Bible was something that people showed up to church on a Sunday and stabbed each other in the back, and whether it's slept around, drank, abusiveness, whatever else throughout the week. Hypocritical craziness. I was like, I don't need that. That's not my jam. No, thank you. So that was my response at first with him. I played percussion in the past and recorded a CD and tried a little bit at becoming a professional musician, but it just wasn't for me. A whole nother story and tangent. But at the time, it was a way for us to bond, and I got to hang out and play with his band a little bit, and that was fun. The chemical recovery group was something that really just started to rock me to my core, had me sit down and really just be introspective on a deep level, on a level where I had never really gone before.
Because it's uncomfortable.
It was something that it's uncomfortable and we don't like. I mean, whether it's, we talk about a DEI lens. Emmanuel Ocho and Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man there. Across the board, we don't like conversations that are unfamiliar or rock us to our core. I don't, because they're difficult, they're challenging. However, they're critically important, and sometimes really the most important sometimes conversations to have, and the most important when it comes to survival and the basics. And in my case, that was very much the situation. Those conversations were necessary. So it opened up just a different, a better way. It introduced me to the Bible in a way that was fundamentally about love. That's ultimately what Jesus said. Love other people, love God. That's like the law summed up at its core. And a love that I had not really known before, because love is more of a verb. So as I dug into that and really started to learn what loving other people was like, and caring for other people and thinking about people beyond myself. And again, I was still like 18 at the time. And for anybody that's ever been around a teenager before, it is somewhat developmentally appropriate for that teen to be the center of the world. So was still trying to break out and needed some help to be able to do that. That being said, changed my life. Lots of different tangents within that story. By grace, now it's been 25 years sober, and sobriety a far better way. So that laid some of the groundwork to be able to go beyond myself and survive through the addiction, the overdose, and all of that. Developing personally and professionally came about out of necessity, just needing to survive. I mentioned I was right around 16 when I moved out of my parents' house and didn't go back, needed to figure out a legal way of supporting myself. Selling drugs just wasn't okay. I didn't want to go back to that. I knew that it just reaped destruction. And I knew that there wasn't a future in doing so, which at the time was also challenging because I didn't necessarily have a clear vision for my personal future. And I think that's really an important point for everyone listening. Hope is possible to have, and hope is necessary to have. When we lack hope, then we tend
Mhm.
not to choose decisions that are in the best interests of our future self. And for me, through my addiction, that was certainly the case. I didn't have
Yeah.
hope for a future. So my decisions were destructive personally, whether it was physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and it destroyed relationships around me too. So hope is really important. So going through and having those people in my life, some different mentors, people who cared about me to show me hope for a future, helped me to realize that, you know, there was a path of possibility of a hope and a future. And that's critically
Yeah,
important.
that
Especially,
is.
I mean, for all of us now coming through COVID and
Mhm.
challenges that so many families and people are experiencing, that's something that just can't be underscored and highlighted enough. Hope
I agree.
is possible. So eventually ended up when I was 19 years old in 1999. Don't do the math. I'm old. Let me just tell you. But in 1999, ended up needing a job. I moved around, some roommates, all of that kind of thing,
Mhm.
and started working for a nonprofit financial education counseling agency called American Consumer Credit Counseling.
Yes, I've heard of.
And yeah, so it's a great organization. At the
Yeah.
time, I was like the 24th employee, I think, something like
Whoa.
that. Really small back in
You're aging
99.
yourself again here, Matt.
And I didn't have the slightest clue about personal. I mean, yes, I had transferable skills, as they say in
Mhm.
workforce development. With drug dealing, I had to organize, I had to figure out inventory management, and
That is
there's
so true.
marketing and all of those things
Yeah.
that don't
Mhm.
really fit neatly on a resume,
Yeah.
but can work practically speaking.
Mhm.
So for anybody involved in that kind of life, there is a better way. And there are skills that are learned that
Yeah.
are very valuable in the
Yes.
economy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's possible to lay your head on a pillow at night with peace, which is really important. So started working there, eventually got my GED, eventually took a little bit of college, eventually, obtained some different credentials, certified educator, personal finance, certified credit counselor, a variety of those different things, and continue just to grow and learn. I always loved learning. I hated the traditional institution of learning
Mhm.
because it really didn't suit my needs. And I know
Yeah.
with your background, as we were talking about, Andrea, I know that you understand that deeply. Not
Yeah.
everybody learns the same way.
No.
And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that one person is less than or not smart
Mhm.
enough. No, it just means that we're different. And that really is a spice of life that makes life enjoyable and
I
tasty and
agree.
exciting. It's necessary.
Yes. Yes. I also related to the spiciness of and blandness and stuff like that of food as well. So I'm right there with you,
I
Matt.
love to eat. I love to cook. So forgive my analogies for anybody out there that are like, why is this guy talking? I thought we were talking about personal finance and DEI. What's all this stuff about spice and food? Well, I like to dig in a little bit there. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was an amazing opportunity where I was able to learn and grow personally and professionally. And
That is awesome.
eventually, with the organization, as the organization grew, more and
Hmm.
more opportunities presented themselves. So I helped to
Yeah.
start an education outreach group
Oh,
where we
wonderful.
traveled and educated all different groups. As you read in my bio,
Mm.
I mean, as young as preschool up to senior citizens in
Oh,
nursing
yeah.
homes. It ran
Yeah.
the spectrum. It ran the gamut.
That is awesome
All different.
because financial literacy is not in the K through 12 system, which it needs to be. And so yeah, I was so happy to have read that you um, got them as early as pre-K and kindergarten, because I mean that's where they're learning and where they're absorbing, and not everybody's situation is the same. We're, as you said, we're all different. Everybody's experiences, home life, upbringing, everything are different. And educate, parents' education and stuff, and time, and some parents are working 2-3 jobs to put food on the table and keep a roof over their families' heads. And so those kids in those types of households may not often not don't get exposed to um, more traditional, historically traditional households where there's one or two working parents that come home at the same time, around the same time. They help their kids with their homework, and also there's I was just so happy to see that you were starting to, you started this outreach program to reach kids.
And it is so, like you were saying, it's amazing, even the research going back even generations, digging into something like epigenetics, which is actually the study of how environment influences and is passed on genetically. And for kids in poverty, it's oftentimes a multi-generational thing that is not as easy as, well, everybody's heard, just spend less than you make and you'll be good. Well, it's not that simple. There are a lot of systemic barriers. There are challenges that run deep. And when I say deep, generationally deep, there's so much that's there.
Because and us individuals who have not been exposed or around communities like this just assume like, oh, they just they're on welfare because they're abusing the system. They're and some of them aren't on. They choose not to be on welfare. Like my mother, she chose not to be on welfare. But I have not met in all my time working with adult education at a literacy council. So I worked with GED programs and programs that ESL programs. But the GED and adult basic education programs were those for those adults that slipped through the cracks, that were not getting the needs taught the way that they learned best. So they were falling through the cracks. And but I have not met anyone, and I'm sure there are, but in my experience, I haven't met anyone who from low income communities that did not stretch their dollar as far as it could go, and really knew it was when things were due and all, especially parents of children in low income neighborhoods, and it's just amazing that with the little money that was coming into the household, they stretched it as far as it could go. But as you said, there's those systemic barriers and that generational poverty oftentimes credit scores and everything like that, because they do get credit cards and stuff to help out, and often kind of mismanage those a little bit sometimes. But yeah, it's financial literacy in low income, I mean, not just low income neighborhoods, but nationwide and probably globally, is sorely needed, because not everybody is exposed to the same experiences and it gets the same type of education that others may see as the norm. So
that's true. And that really right there, Andrea, as you said, strikes at the heart of what financial inclusion is all about. It really is about access and opportunity that's fair, equitable, and for too many, there is a history in our country and around the world, but I live in the United States, and that's where my expertise is. There's a history of exclusion, whether it goes back to specific laws. And I think as far as even just defining racism and defining what structural racism is, because I think that's an important thing, even just to take a moment now to make sure that as listeners and with this dialogue that we're speaking about the same thing, because there's various levels when it comes to discrimination. There's interpersonal discrimination. I don't like you because you're different, and I'm going to make your life difficult. Well, that's interpersonal.
Yeah.
Systemic is a whole nother level that makes certain barriers and creates different barriers that, one, are unnecessary, but they're created barriers, whether it be by law, from the Chinese Exclusion Acts to redlining. And for those, I guess I'll just say it. I know that there's a conversation to say, well, all of that racism is in the past. That's not, well, no. Last year, the government levied the largest fines and penalties against redlining in its history. It was like over $100 million, right around $109 million that was levied because of redlining. And redlining is,
I was going to say, can you define it for our listeners?
Yeah, thanks. And please stop me at any point if I start saying something that's like, what? I don't think anybody else is going to know that. So thank you. Redlining is the practice, and it came about before the 60s when it was literally outlawed and a law created against it. But it came about in the name because lenders actually drew red lines around neighborhoods on a map where they would not lend. And it wasn't necessarily because of just credit scores or anything else. It was inner city populations, and specifically, the practice was designed to exclude populations, particularly of Black and brown people. And it exists today. It's prevalent today, and whether not just home ownership, and some might say, well, home ownership, that's unaffordable anyway now with interest. Well, it's also rental applications. And studies have shown, I live in the greater Boston area, studies have shown specifically in some of our suburbs, and it's replicated throughout the country, where just because of a name on an application, a renter was denied rent. Housing. So they had a great credit and two applications. The way that the study was done, two applications, identical information, identical credit, identical income, all of that. The only difference was one name sounded, quote unquote, more ethnic. Sounded more like a minority than John Doe or Jim Smith. And just because of that,
I'm sorry, go ahead. You go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I would say that just doesn't happen in finance and real estate. That happens in applying to jobs. I mean, that name discrimination, promotions, getting access to services, and not just names either, but how you look as well. And there's rezoning. It still happens today with school districts. Like when I taught, and it was after the 2000s, of course, but I've been at the special ed teaching for a while now. But it was after the 2000s, so this century. I worked at a low income middle school, and students were bussed down the busy two-way highway, not highway, but street, I guess you can say, very busy street, about 2-3 miles down. And this was middle school, not high school, to come to our school, where they could have walked 2 blocks to the other middle school because they lived on the other side of the busy street, and it was a trailer park. And so, and parents in that more successful, I should say, same school district, successful school, with because back then school districts would get, and schools would get money based on how many students passed the state exam. And they didn't want those scores affected. So they would bus those low income children to our school. Because of that, that we, you're different. We those stereotypes, and a lot of those students were smart, but it was based on their demographic. So,
yeah, it's the NIMBY, the not in my backyard, that creates some of that. And within education, to highlight your point, Andrea, which is an important one, schools are segregated now. And oftentimes much more so than desegregation. And a lot of it revolves around test scores and things like that. But it also revolves around money, because the resources for schools are also designated by taxes, property taxes specifically. So where there's rich white people in suburbs, there's generally far more resources put into schools. And because of that affects trajectories. I mean, education is huge. Education changes trajectories of people's lives all the time. And the opposite is also true. The lack of education, or lack even of access to education, stifles progress and opportunity. And unfortunately, it happens all the time. and serves only to make it much more difficult for some populations than others, needlessly so.
Yep,
But
I
it's
agree.
that systemic, that broad, systemic part that creates so many problems that's different than the interpersonal relationships.
I agree. I agree.
So morally, I'm against that as well. And I'm all about loving other people. And I enjoy spending time with people who are different than me. It's also within my genes. And it's interesting for most Americans, it is as well. For me personally, I'm quote unquote African American. I don't identify as Black, but 20% of my genetic makeup is sub-Saharan African because my grandfather was a Black man from Jamaica originally, in that lineage. And all of us in the United States were a melting pot. That is
definitely, yeah,
country. And unfortunately, too often that's forgotten about. That interpersonal relationship is huge. The systemic part continues to hold people down. In my book that I wrote, and I know you asked the original question, go off on lots of tangents.
I do too, so I'm right there with you.
I love tangents. I love it. So I came about to writing a book and going off on my own. I left American Consumer Credit Counseling somewhere around 2018, I believe it was, and to become a speaker on my own, where it wasn't speaking on behalf of the company, but it was exclusive to the things that I found were important to financial inclusion on a much deeper level, beyond just credit cards. And I say just, that's critically important too, because now over 30%, almost 40% of the country has more credit card debt than they do emergency savings. So credit card debt and saving is huge. And I still support that. I'm on the board of American Consumer Credit Counseling now. But
don't get me started on payday loans.
Oh yeah, payday loans and aggressive predatory lending. So financial inclusion, that's where I came up with even the Financial Deposit Insurance Corporation has a group called AEI, Alliance for Economic Inclusion. Shout out to Paul Horowitz, shout out to Kip Child, Ida Franquez, thank you. So many that I was able to learn from about financial inclusion, because many are excluded. They're either unbanked or underbanked. And it's a significant portion of our population because of being unbanked, meaning not having a savings account or going to a traditional financial institution, or underbanked, meaning maybe someone might have a bank account, but doesn't really use it, still gets cash, maybe even goes to a check casher, but still heavily relies on alternative financing, which can be everything, like you said, from payday loans to title loans to check cashers to pawnbrokers to so many predatory lenders. And the internet makes it that much easier. And states find it more and more difficult to regulate. In Massachusetts here, we have a rate cap of, I think it's 34% APR, annual percentage rate.
Oh my gosh.
That's low because when you get into things like
That's
payday
low?
loans and some of the predatory loans, the interest rates start to get into the hundreds, can be like 500% APR. And all these fees are being paid just for someone to have access to a paycheck, just to have access to a paycheck. So one tip, if someone has trouble or doesn't even know what might be on different reports, the credit report's important. Annualcreditreport.com is one place where listeners can go to look at their credit report, but also looking at bank lending and things like that, and whether or not there's overdraft fees or any type of additional banking fees that can show up on some of those reports. So that's important. There's a whole chapter in my book about credit reports. There's many different credit reporting agencies, so we don't have time to go into all of those now. However, Alliance for Economic Inclusion, great. And they're across the country. So if any of the listeners are looking for help with financial inclusion, sometimes it can be language barriers. Sometimes it's cultural barriers. I mean, even within financial education, I remember teaching a class. There was a young grandmother that was there with her young grandchild. And we were talking about personal finance. In the United States, we're very familiar with the concept of a lemonade stand and teaching and encouraging and fostering entrepreneurship. This family from Eastern Europe, culturally, that was counter to everything that they believed. children's job was education in the traditional sense, reading, writing, arithmetic. Adults thought about and were concerned with money. And that was a cultural nuance. And cultural competence is critically important when we talk about financial inclusion, but also overall. I mean, as you were talking about, Andrea, in education, in healthcare, I mean, health disparities that exist from redistricting, rezoning. We talk about as prevalence of asthma, whether we talk about things even like infant mortality. There are so many tragedies that are preventable, but yet we continue because some of that prejudice has been ongoing and it's been the default. So together we can change it. And I love the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
So cancer gave me the opportunity to write a book. If anybody notice, I sometimes like to do lots of stuff and have lots of energy. But shortly after I left ACCC back in 2019, shortly like in 2019, started getting sick and was diagnosed with bile duct cancer, which brutal, aggressive, very rare form.
I hadn't heard of that cancer before.
Cancer. I mean, most people die within like 6 months to a year and a half. And some people are able to survive, and with some of the treatments that are out there, by grace, I survived. I mean, I coded on, it was a journey. I coded on the table, and my wife was told, you won't survive the night, plan and prepare for that. A whole lot of information, a whole lot of stories. Sorry for the downer. That's reality. And when I said my life and story, when you asked, had lots of twists and turns. This was one of those. And life happens to all of us. It's not a matter of if, but it's when. And preparing mentally, physically, financially, it does make a difference.
It does.
So over the past few years, I went through radiation and chemo, and by grace had a liver transplant that saved my life. And through that time, I couldn't get up and about that much. The most that I was able to do some days was eat enough to keep on living, get my treatment, and type a few keystrokes to come up with this book, Financially Capable.
Kept you mentally, what's the word? Not aware, but you're not challenged. You're mentally challenged. You weren't mentally challenged.
I am.
I cannot find the word I'm looking for.
It kept me mentally stimulated. It gave
Thank
me
you. Stimulated. That's what I wanted to say.
So a big part of who I am is wanting to help other people. It's not just about me. I moved out of that teenage phase, and as I shared earlier in our conversation, left that behind to realize life is more than just about me. So helping other people is something that really is core to my life. That's really important. And writing a book was one of the low energy ways that I was able to do something, to get something out into the world that could help people be aware of access and opportunity, what financial inclusion is. And personal finance is more than just the nuts and bolts, budgeting and credit. We touched on that today, but also the mental, emotional, psychological aspects of dealing with money. So when it comes to, I know I mentioned working with the same definition. When it comes to financial inclusion and even understanding the systemic aspects that I've mentioned multiple times, and for some that might be a new concept, for others, they probably know more than me, and I love to continue to learn. But I use this definition in this chapter called Deferred Dreams and Skin Color. Prejudice makes us all poorer. But the Australian Human Rights Commission defines racism as the process by which systems and policies, actions and attitudes create inequitable opportunities and outcomes for people based on race. Racism is more than just prejudice in thought or action. It occurs when this prejudice, whether individual or institutional, is accompanied by the power to discriminate against, oppress, or limit the rights of others. And the heart of financial inclusion is really being aware with that definition that it's more than just a given action, but there's also the power to discriminate. Redlining is one of those examples that, though it's outlawed, a common practice still, unfortunately. and needs to change because
Mhm.
we as people, we as a country in the United States, and we as humans on
Mhm.
Earth are better off with diversity. If everybody
Yes.
thought like me, or if everybody took a moment and think about if everybody were exactly like, think about it, fill in the blank,
Mhm.
your mom,
Yeah.
your dad. We love our parents, but if every single
Yeah.
person were exactly like them, it'd be a different kind of world. Think
Yeah.
about as I'm going, you're listening to this crazy guy on this podcast. Think about if everybody in the world thought just like Matt Paradise. Think about how crazy that'd be. There might be some spiciness, but I mean, come on, really? That's not a world I would want to live in. My wife is like the polar opposite of me. And our
Really?
lives are so much richer because of it. Yeah, we
Nice,
joke like
nice.
I got my GED. She went to MIT. She's
Oh,
like
awesome.
very different culturally. She was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in New England. So many different aspects that make us different. But to give a specific example, even when we were married, she's the kind of person who had her, this ages us a little bit, but our CD for the
Oh, yeah.
younger
Hmm.
people out there,
Yeah, I had a
CD.
tape deck in my car.
Yeah, we. I think we still have a bunch. We
I
still have
do
a bunch of
too.
tapes. um, so CDs, a compact disc. My son's like, well, yeah. I mean, I could show him once in a while to be like, back in my day, this. So we had our music on CDs. She was the type of person who alphabetized her music collection.
Oh, wow.
I was the type of person who didn't necessarily put the matching CD in the matching case. So every time I wanted to listen to a specific song, I had to search for it and
That's
maybe went
hilarious.
off on a tangent finding something else. But uh, we worked through that. That was
That's
some years
funny.
ago, and CDs now have been donated to the library.
I still have
But
mine. I have to donate them.
yeah, it's all
Still have
good.
my DVDs too. So.
They're still valuable. They still work.
Yeah, do they?
They still work. Um,
Wow.
Yeah. So that
Listen.
diversity just it
Hmm.
enriches our lives.
It
And
does. It
countless
does.
data shows that whether it's in the economy, a diverse economy is an enriched economy.
Hmm.
Companies, businesses are better when there's diverse thought, there's
Yes.
diverse personalities, there's diverse
Hmm.
perspectives, there's diverse cultures. Diversity is
Yep.
broad. And I think
Yeah.
this is where right now our national conversation around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Hmm.
hurts my heart. Like there's
Yeah.
so much conversation about, okay, well, it's going to be outlawed and universities
Yeah.
can't have a DEI
Yeah.
program. And
Well, affirmative
there are many
action has been
DEI.
taken away, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's
it's yeah.
also, I think DEI programs also have fallen short. I think part of it is, I know for me, I also am very reductive in my thinking, right? I want a magic pill to fix everything. I don't want to have to go through difficult steps to change it. And I'm
Yeah.
reductive in that way. I don't necessarily want to think holistically of here's
Hmm.
my life. Give me like the three things that can change my life and I can
Yeah.
easily do in my sleep.
Hmm.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah, that
That's
would
just
be
not
awesome,
how
but life unfortunately doesn't work that way.
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
No.
And
And diversity is
yeah.
so much broader than, I say, just black or white. Um,
Hmm.
and obviously there's a significant chasm even
Yeah.
between those two colors, but even
Hmm.
black. I mean, when we look at even the way that the US Census works in identifying different people of color,
Hmm.
different cultures are just completely different. If
Yeah.
lumping just black or brown or different color skin than my
Hmm.
pastiness, then it's limited even in
Yeah.
understanding where people are coming from.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's intersectionality. Like I'm
it is.
there's still some forms that still say African American. It's like, okay, well, what about Dominican or Cuban? Or I mean, you can, or even uh Brazilian, and there's blacks all over the world. They don't maybe way back when they may have originated from the continent of Africa, but that's not how they identify today. And it's it I want to go, it's just mind-boggling, but I'm glad to see that some forms are starting to update it and add um more categories to it, and also have an others now,
Mhm,
but there's still a lot of forms out there that don't. Like me, I'm mixed, so I'm like,
mhm,
well, I'm like, sometimes there was forms that said white, not Hispanic, but then they didn't have anything else. And I was like, okay, they didn't have another question that said, are you Hispanic? And it was like, yes or no. And I was like, well, what do I put? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I have no clue. And so there's we try to box people into different identities, and it's impossible because we're a mix, as you said, we're just a mix of everything. And I want to backtrack way back to something that you said early on about when you were a teenager, after you decided to leave home, and you came to Boston and got connected to the recovery program, and it really made you self-assess. You had to look at yourself uncomfortably and be honest, and that is difficult. And sometimes people have to hit rock bottom a few times before they take that step out of that comfort zone and take that leap. And it's but self-assessment is truly eye-opening, and it's a healing experience. And I want to talk about that, the verb of love. Before you can love others and allow others to love you, you have to love yourself, flaws and everything, because nobody's perfect. And that is hard to do because we're our worst enemy, but we're also our best friend. And I'm just so glad that you found your friend. And because to me, it's like opportunities present themselves all the time, and we just have to be brave enough to be aware, see them when they do. Sometimes, I'm not saying I've passed, there's many opportunities that have passed me by that I was either too uncomfortable to and low self-esteem and self-confidence to take that leap, or unaware, I wasn't looking, and but I honestly believe that opportunities present themselves all the time to us. And when it comes to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, everything you were saying is just resonating so much with me. And there is still so much work, not only the United States, but the universe, the world needs to do. Yeah. The universe too, but the world needs to do, because we're only going to keep getting we're only going to keep mixing and becoming spicier, and because, and we have to start embracing that, because nobody likes blandness. Blandness does not produce, is not engaging. It doesn't. It's a good cause for conflict also, when everybody's the same, because everybody's going to get on each other's nerves if everybody is exactly the same. So organizations really need to realize that, and I'm glad you brought in the organizational component, that their employees are all different, whether they choose to disclose certain identities to their leadership or not. They're all different, and that's what makes innovation happen. That's what makes productivity happening. That's what makes a happy employee. When take that back. An employee is happy when leadership listens and values their team, and they have a sense of belonging and can be their authentic selves at work. And the leadership supports that, and it's that makes a happy employee. But the productiveness and the innovation comes from that diversity, because we all have different experiences and backgrounds and educations and ways of thinking. I was talking with another guest earlier this weekend about neurodiversity, and many neurodiverse people think outside the box. And a lot of neurodiverse people, or a lot of entrepreneurs do identify as neurodiverse. And it's individuals like that, and individuals from low income areas, individuals from other countries, individuals who speak other languages, that create this wonderful, I'm going to use a food analogy again, like what is that, paella of a dish. I know. The more seafood and spices and I mean, it's just
saffron,
delicious.
little stuff.
Oh, okay, I need to get some paella.
Yeah. But it are all those diverse ingredients that make the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I agree. So let's look at some of the questions that we prepared. So let's look at question number 2. In what ways can financial education and empowerment programs be tailored to address the unique needs and challenges faced by diverse populations, including communities of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, and people with disabilities? What are your thoughts on that? That's a big question, I know.
My first thought is that's such a big, thoughtful question. Let me see. Do we have 5 more hours? Yeah, I think it ties in actually to what you were just talking about in employers and organizations creating spaces of belonging. I think even belonging is kind of I think the DEIBA, so diversity, equity, inclusion, the belonging, accessibility, and particularly when we talk about neurodiverse people, I can relate. Like the challenge too often is in our post-industrial sort of educational, both academic as well as professional systems, we're trained to look at the box. We're trained to think about the box.
1 + 1 = 2.
Someone who's like, yeah, what are you talking? And I'm like, what box? What are you talking about? So I tend to be like, yeah, before I get too far off on that tangent, people think differently.
They do.
People learn differently, and that's a good thing. So that DEIBA is the bare minimum. I mean, we are created equal with inalienable rights in our Constitution, though it's written, it's really not practiced. So yes, we have protections within the law. That's the bare minimum. Unfortunately, we're not even operating there. Ideally, in answering the question, thinking about what can be done, it really goes to moving from even a safe space to a brave space. Because a safe space is, I mean, we've just, I mean, I'm pausing and stumbling on words because it makes me emotional even just thinking about tragedies, whether we talk about, LGBTQ plus shootings and, the Miami nightclub or so many others where just having a safe space is not something that everybody like is quote unquote guaranteed in the world that we live. We live in a violent world. We live in a place where there's wars and rumors of wars, and it's sad. So I get caught up in that because there's the ideal and then there's the reality of where we are. And the reality of where we are is a painful one. And it really does take love, I think, to move past that, to more of even working towards an ideal. And I think the hope is that we continue to work towards that ideal, that we don't compromise and say, well, this is good enough. We have a place that there's some diversity because, somebody's a little bit younger than me. Well, if that's the bar, that's pretty sad. I mean, if their skin complexion isn't exactly the same as yours, that's pretty sad if that's the bar. Right? Much different to talk about where someone isn't just able to show up to work, but where their difference is actually celebrated and they can contribute in a meaningful way to the profitability of a company. When we talk about company in learning or teaching in academia, or just getting by in life. So when we talk about being brave, it takes bravery. I mean, I know you were talking about me and my situation as a teen, and taking that introspective pause to say, what's going on here to be able to survive? Something needs to change. But daily, people are faced with the fact that there's not always a safe space.
Yeah.
I
mean, how many Black mothers have to have that conversation with their Black sons? It's upsetting.
It is. It is. I have friends that have been pulled over in their predominantly white town, and a specific situation I have is a picture in my mind. A good friend's son was pulled over for walking down the street for being Black, and
so he wasn't even in a car. He was walking.
He wasn't in a car. He was walking. He was in his own town where he lived, and nothing suspicious other than being a teenager, and basically questioned and interrogated for walking while Black. And I know that's just one specific example. It's a good friend of mine, so I have the vivid image in my head because I know what their face looks like. But there's stories like that across the country.
Yeah, there are.
There's stories. I mean, we can, I guess, just to think about whether it's Trayvon Martin. For me, I remember in my early 20s, it was Amadou Diallo in New York, who was shot over 21 times in the back. Just
I hadn't heard of this one. Oh, wow.
Walking, for being, not doing anything wrong whatsoever. He reached for his wallet and the police misinterpreted that. So I know that can cause a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions for a lot of people, because it is emotion. And it takes bravery to sit and reflect personally of where we are in the spectrum. Because when it comes to racial disparities, being non-racist is not enough. I mean, if we sit back and just say, well, I'm not racist because I don't use that N-word, or even if it comes up on a song I like, I skip it, or I'm not throwing rocks at people or burning crosses. So, well, again, if that's the bar, that's sad. That's just not enough. But
and if they're not doing anything, that they're bystanders, and they're
still
unintentionally supporting it.
Yes, very much so. Yes, versus being non-racist. Going from non-racist to anti-racist, being against it, to say, hey, this is wrong. This is also something for me that to confront and work on white fragility. And again, white fragility is something that is a contentious topic. It's not something that I created or thought up, but I know that I have privileges and received privileges because of the color of my skin. And if
you're a man.
And I'm a man on top of it. For being nothing else. To give a specific example, a good friend of mine, when I was a teenager, we sold drugs together. I was white, he was not. And I remember getting pulled over one time. We both were doing drugs, selling drugs, pretty much the same thing. I remember getting pulled over, and he was the one that got arrested, thrown on the ground, handcuffed. Well, I was just kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's okay. Go have a seat, young white boy.
You're being influenced by the bad Black boy or person of color.
That was their perspective. Where I was just as involved, 100%. And so those are some small anecdotal situations. But creating a brave space means that we're able to have these uncomfortable conversations, these introspective and uncomfortable conversations to communicate. And that's something that I still need to grow in, because my default is to talk, but I need to take the time to listen. I need to listen to perspectives that are different than mine. Yeah. And that's we all do. We all do. We do. We all do.
That's how we educate ourselves and mitigate our implicit biases, because we all have them, even those of us who are DEI allies and advocates and consultants and stuff. We all have them. But it's being aware of our implicit biases and stopping and thinking before we act or speak, or because if we just speak on or act on impulse, it's going to reflect our implicit bias, or the chances are high that it's going to reflect our implicit bias if we don't stop and think. And it's like organizations, when they're interviewing and recruiting candidates, it's there's a lot of affinity bias and anchoring bias and halo bias. It's like you're comfortable with the people that look and sound like you. You try to find something where you can relate with each other. You try to find something to prove your initial thought of like, oh, these are a great candidate, that halo bias, or that I forgot I want to say, it's not the devil bias, it's the opposite of the halo bias. I'm losing my thought, but it's just like where you're finding you have your initial negative thought, you're trying to find something to validate that on the opposite side. It's just all these things. And
confirmation bias.
Yeah, confirmation bias. Yes, thank you. And it's just we as humans, especially those everybody, but those in organizations that are in a leadership or management type role, need to be even more aware of these biases and get trained on DEI topics and strategies and initiatives, and walk the walk, not just talk the talk, because it's, as we were saying earlier, if all your employees look alike, and not that innovation won't happen and productivity won't be there, but it's not going to be as progressive. It's not going to be as flavorful, and it's boring when everything's the same. It's just boring, and it's going to affect profit margins and maybe even employee satisfaction and retention too. More of the youth are looking for diversity and are looking for validations of for organizations before they even apply. That's very important to them, which is wonderful. I hate to say it, but I've heard it a few times in the past that unfortunately, like the old ways of thinking need to die out first before true progress can happen. But it takes people like us to keep the voice, voicing our concerns and being advocates and allies and educating others to make sure that progress is being built on. Like we're making tiny steps, one person at a time. So until
That's
that that way of thinking ages out.
I agree. So I know you asked the simple question, how is it that financial education can be tailored? And I think that tailored aspect is right at the heart of it. Everybody's different. And when it comes to personal finance, keeping it personal and keeping it, whether culturally aware, aware, not just of the average or the mean or the median, but that there's stories and there's people, and those people have a background, and those people have a perspective that needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
So that the information is useful and relevant. If it's not useful and relevant, then what's the point? It's just a lot of hot air and wasted money. Billions and billions of dollars have been spent on different financial literacy programs that really don't make substantial change because it comes from a traditional singular and dated perspective. And whether it's healthcare or otherwise is similar. I mean, in healthcare, if you're a white cis male, then healthcare is probably far better than if you fall outside of that norm or perspective. And ultimately, we talked about it a little bit in this conversation, but somebody might be asking, why are you talking about medical stuff? I thought it was personal finance. It's whole health well. And it is personal finance. I mean, if all your money and your health is, crushed because of systemic inequality, it's pretty difficult to think about saving a few extra bucks.
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand. It's tied together. I shared a moment ago, in our household, cancer changed our lives. And it wasn't lost on me that through the pandemic, I had access to some of the best healthcare in the world, while people around the world were dying because they couldn't get access to basic healthcare.
Yeah.
And not just around the world, in the United States as well. I mean, we have such a shortage. So with that specific question, how can that financial education empowerment be tailored? It really is looking at individuals, at people, and keeping it personal.
I love that. Yeah. Human centeredness is so important because, as we were saying before, everybody's different. Everybody has different experiences, has different situations. And it needs to be tailored to the individual and their needs and their goals and aspirations, financial goals and aspirations. So I hope more organizations have EAPs, employment assistance programs, and because a lot of times in there they have a financial, for lack of a better word, coach that can start having those consultations with the staff in one-on-ones with the staff, and make referrals as well out to community agencies like financial empowerment centers or Alliance for Economic Inclusion. So it's so the individual can get even more assistance for their financial situation. It's I mean, because if you have an employee that is struggling financially, they are not wholly there in the office. They may be there, or even if they're working remotely, they may be sitting at the computer and doing their stuff, but their mind is elsewhere. They have stress on them. They cannot be 100% productive. And EAP programs can help with that. But it also comes down to communicating to your teams, in person and hybrid or remote, that these programs exist. And if you don't have a program, think about creating one, or have a list of resources that are accessible to all your staff, community resources for whichever part of the world they may live in, because chances are you have at least one, probably more, employee that is struggling financially, or can benefit, or has a lot of questions about their finances. Like, I don't know how to save for a home, or I don't know how to mortgage a home. Where do I go? It's like, or what about my student loans if they went to college or something like that? Or my child is wanting to go to college, but how can I start saving for that? All these, different types of situations and questions that these programs, the financial education programs, can help empower them to be more confident in taking control of their situations. So, yeah, it's
so true. And I think one of the points that you just highlighted that's, I think, important. Well, two situations. One is, for sure, if anybody's part of an organization, a nonprofit, for-profit, academic institution, government institution, NPO, then for sure, if you have more than 0 people part of that organization, somebody's struggling with something.
Yes.
But the second part that I think that you said that's really important is whether an organization is able to pay for an EAP, employee assistance program. Many are offered through insurance companies and others. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money to care for those who you're working with, working for, and those who work for you. Ultimately, it takes care and concern. It takes valuing that employee, in the case of organizations, to put together, like you said, Andrea, I think is really important. Even just community resources. There are resources even that are free. As a company, as an organization, or a leader in that business, you don't have to provide that. But in the community, there are lots of different resources that are available. On my website, mattparadise.com, I have many that are accessible for free, to have different links to different organizations. You mentioned some, like the Alliance for Economic Inclusion. There's financial institutions across the country who are specifically committed to access and opportunity for those who are marginalized, and really is important to the core of their mission. And many provide grants, many even have foundations providing work within your area. If you're listening to this in the United States, within your area. So looking for that, reaching out, compiling those is something that brings added value without necessarily added cost. And I think that's really important because also, like you said, Andrea, these are issues, even whether not even getting into whether morally we believe or don't believe in the DEIBA work. It's good for the bottom line.
It is. It is.
It actually increases productivity. It increases the profitability of an organization. It reduces costs. As you said, stress. I mean, it's been reported that almost 3/4 of the population are stressed because of finances and worry about that stress at work. And for a huge percentage of that population, it's PTSD-like symptoms. Worrying about, can I survive? Can I keep the roof over my head and my family's head today? Can I put food on the table? Can we have heat through the winter? All of those questions that are really paramount to survival, the employees in the organization are thinking about, are worried about, are stressed about. So providing some basic resources that are there. There's food pantries in our community. We have many different food pantries that serve the community. My wife and I ran one for several years, and they're fantastic because food insecurity is real. When we talk about academic institutions, many students drop out because they can't afford to eat. And some schools are learning.
And some colleges are actually having food pantries now for their students.
Yeah, they are. Right. But these are really, really big topics that we're talking about. And to come up with solutions to help everybody, we need really, really big solutions. We need to come together to acknowledge on the basic level of our humanity that there are people struggling to survive, and that affects all of us. It's not somebody just over there. It's not the NIMBY we talked about, not in my backyard, whether it's somebody different, looking different, thinking different, acting different. It affects all of us. And for that reason, we all need to take that deep introspective consideration to be brave, to talk about those conversations that are difficult, to talk with other people and provide a comfortable, safe, enough space for them to be brave, a brave space where we can also listen. Because if we're not growing, then we're dying as individuals.
That's true.
As communities, as a country. If we're not growing, we're dying. And with that growth, it takes other people. It takes moving beyond our comfort zone. Because if we try to apply the same ideas to the problems that got us into our current situation, then we're not going to change. To be able to find solutions to our current predicament, we need to try something different. And other people help make that possible.
We need to advocate for policy change and systemic reform. Last question, I know we're a little over, but what role does financial literacy play in promoting economic justice and dismantling systemic barriers to wealth accumulation and financial security?
There's a lot in there, so I won't. I'll do my best. I can't say I will. My best not to go on too many tangents.
Okay.
But I'll talk about financial capability because that's the premise in which my book was structured. And for an individual to be financially capable, there are 3 things that are required. One is access and opportunity. We've talked a lot about that. Fair, equitable access and opportunity. So when we say equity, or so many get hung up on the idea or the thought of, well, equality of outcome is impossible. That's not what we're even talking about today. We're talking about equity of opportunity, not having systemic barriers that prevent someone needlessly from accessing the same benefit that the person down the road is able to have access to, based on their belief, based on their color, based on the way that they may or may not think, or any other differences that someone might have. So that accessibility, that inclusiveness is critically important. So access opportunity, number one. The second is psychology. we talked a little bit today even about different biases, different heuristics, which are rules of thumb that we go based on. When it comes to personal finances, heuristics kind of rule the day. For anybody involved in financial services, the traditional 4% withdrawal rate through retirement is something now that's being discussed and debated, but many people do the same old thing because it's been done for many, many years. And the world is going to look different 5 years from today. And it certainly looks much different today than it did 5 years ago. We have trouble looking into the future and trying to picture what it's going to be like, but it's going to be different, whether it's because of changes in AI, whether it's changes in perspective, whether it's health nationally, whatever that it might be. 5 years from now, different conversations will happen because we'll be different. And all of the psychology that goes into financial well-being is really important, because that gets back even to the individual appropriateness of given information that we were talking about just a few moments ago. Because our first thoughts and patterns in memory are, one, they're rooted from generations prior to us, because poverty alone is huge and affects so many people. What a lot of people that I've spoken with, and what I didn't understand before even getting involved in this work 25 years ago, is that being in poverty alone reduces an IQ by, some say, up to even 10%. Now, I know statistics, data, information kind of gets fuzzy. There's general agreement that there is a significant change in IQ just as a result of poverty, because there's stress. I've lived not knowing where my next meal is going to come. I've lived sleeping on couches. I've lived on the street. And there's a whole lot more than spending less than I make. I mean, you made the great point earlier, Andrea, about individuals who don't have much are some of the best people at budgeting, because when you don't have much, you get creative. You do what you can. Every single penny matters. When you have more than enough, when there's an abundance, then you don't have to be as particular in counting every pea and every carrot or every bean, because there's an abundance. But that poverty and living with that reality makes it difficult to stop and think critically, because there's constant, one, emergencies coming at us, never mind that difficulty on the genetic level that affects our psychology and our processing, executive functioning. Right. So that's really important, and that's deep. There's a lot there. The second section of my book is about that, but financial psychology really is important, because it's more than just the dollars and cents. It's more than just the nuts and bolts. It's more than, if you're going to budget, just spend less than you make, because money's emotional. We can all agree in general, 1 + 1 = 2. But as soon as we say, well, what's the best thing to do with $2? If you have 3 people, we'll have at least 4 opinions. Because it's not necessarily what's right or wrong. It's what's best for me and my situation with the information that I have. And one of my best quotes, or not best, it's not one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou that's here on my desk. We do the best that we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we do better. And knowledge is the third section. We need to know the nuts and bolts. There are some different laws. We operate within a system. There are different regulations when it comes to finance. And operating within those is important, because otherwise life gets a whole lot different. That doesn't mean that they can't change. And you mentioned the A word, advocacy. And in my mind, there's big A and there's little a. Little a advocacy is getting involved in our community, in our neighborhood, being able to make an interpersonal change. Volunteering, getting on boards. One of my favorite boards, shout out to Girls Inc., where I serve. Helping young girls and young women to be bold, to be the incredible people that they are, and giving those opportunities. Again, opportunity and access is really important. But we can, little a, get involved in advocating for the needs of those around us, because that's just important. It also enriches our lives. My life is so much better because I'm able to learn from those also working in the same area, in this case with young girls and women, to just be incredible. And whether it's STEAM, the science, technology, the engineering, the arts, the technology, it really is important. It's our future. And I want that future for my niece. I want that future for my neighbor's daughter and the others. And we talked about Not to say that that's taking away from boys or men.
Mm-hmm.
I already have some privileges because I am a man, and the
Mm-hmm.
wage gap and gender, we don't have time for that. That's not it. That's a tangent that I'm going to try to reel back in. It is real.
It
And
is
then there's
very
the
real.
big A. It is. And the big A is advocating, coming to understand what some of those, whether it's a wage gap based on gender, whether it's based on race, racial disparities are huge, wealth gaps are huge. Women still make less money than men for doing the same job.
And women of color make even less.
People of color make even less. When we talk about wealth disparities, The Color of Wealth in Boston was a publication from the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. Now I'm starting to talk fast to get it all in because there's a lot and we're already over time. But the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston and San Francisco worked in respective communities to show that the data is clear. The data is real. People have less wealth because they're Black and brown as a result of systemic disparities. It's there. I'll stop because we don't have time, but the big A, advocacy is getting involved even with legislation. Talk to your local representative. It's not all, those changes don't all happen at the federal level. Many do, but there's a lot that happens in our local communities that I know we're in a presidential year and lots of arguments there. Yes, get out and vote for president and vote for our congressmen and women and senators and people, but also get involved locally because local politics really, it affects so much of our day-to-day life. The taxes that we pay and things like that are really affected quite a bit on the local level. So in our cities and towns and in our state to advocate for the things that we consider important. And to me, this work of DEI BA is important for all of us to have a tasty life. Bringing it back around to the food analogy, to have a taste. I want a tasty life. I don't want to just sit bored and bland waiting for the shriveled up raisin of a day to die. I want a tasty life. So I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the listeners and those who are spending the time to invest in just learning and growing and making a difference in each respective community and families. And I appreciate even just learning from you, Andrea.
Likewise. I've learned so much from this conversation. So, I just really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Matt, for coming on. So before we get to our key takeaways and next steps for our listeners, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they have questions or want to connect with you to speak at one of their events or on their podcast, or if they just have they want to email you a question to get, maybe you can connect them to a financial agency or something like that.
Sure. Thank you for asking. To make it simple, mattparadise.com is my website. And I am on LinkedIn and I do have a Facebook account. I'm not great with social media, but can connect with me even through my website. The book, Financially Capable, A Friendly Guide to Building Whole Health Wealth, is accessible where people buy books, whether that's Barnes and Noble, whether it's through a local bookstore, whether it's Amazon. Amazon's quick, easy, and pretty much everywhere. But yeah, it's out there. So mattparadise.com is one place to go with those various links. Please reach out. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to connect. Happy to come out and speak. That's financial inclusiveness is a passion of mine. So I have a hard time not speaking about it. But travel around and speak to companies and organizations, big and small.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listeners, I will have Matt's contact information from what he had said, as well as his book title and a link to the Amazon store, because that's the easiest. But if you, I always say support your local bookstore. So if you have a small local bookstore, check first to see if it's there. We want to support our local entrepreneurs. All right, and businesses. All right, so some key takeaways. Matt and I talked about whole health wealth, We explored the concept of whole health wealth, emphasizing the interconnectedness of financial well-being with mental, social, environmental, and other domains of health. And we talked about how addressing systemic disparities such as the wealth gap, wage gaps, and educational inequalities contribute to holistic wealth creation. We talked about financial inclusion and capability. We talked about some strategies for promoting financial inclusion and capability, ensuring that individuals from all backgrounds have access to the resources and knowledge needed to manage their finances effectively. Matt also shared his insights from his extensive experience in financial education and empowerment. We talked about overcoming adversity. Matt talked about his personal journey, and we gained inspiration from that, of his journey of overcoming adversity, including drug addiction, homelessness, cancer, and a liver transplant. And we talked about how resilience, faith, and community support can empower individuals to achieve financial well-being despite facing significant challenges. And we talked about equity in financial education. We discussed the importance of equity in financial education and empowerment initiatives, particularly in addressing the needs of marginalized communities. And we learned how innovative programs and approaches that can promote economic justice and opportunity for everyone. So some possible next steps for my listeners here: evaluate your own financial situation and set goals for improving your financial well-being, considering the principles of whole health wealth. Seek out resources and workshops on financial literacy and capability. As Matt said, a lot of them are free out there at a lot of the community organizations. So seek some of them out, focus on topics such as budgeting, saving, investing, and debt management. There are even some on home ownership. Advocate for inclusive financial policies and practices in your community, workplace, and government, supporting initiatives that promote economic justice and opportunity for everyone. Engage in conversations with friends, family, and colleagues about the importance of financial inclusion and equity, raising awareness about systemic inequalities and advocating for change. And connect with organizations and initiatives that promote financial empowerment and economic justice, volunteering your time or resources to support their efforts. So is there any additional key takeaways or next steps, suggestions for next steps you have for our listeners, Matt, before we let them go for today?
In addition to that, and thank you for summarizing. Yeah. That's a lot, and it's been a fantastic conversation. I hope that listeners are able to even take one thing away from the conversation that's useful and relevant. I would add, there's hope. There's hope for a future.
Yes,
no matter the situation that you have, there's hope, and together we can.
I love it. I will make sure to include that wonderful suggestion or key takeaway, I should say, in the on the slide and also in the summary for today's podcast. And also, listeners, I will be putting Matt's contact information in the summary as well. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to us today. Stay tuned for our next episode. Remember, our episodes are put out every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, stay diversifused. Be a guest speaker on the Get Diversifused podcast, I'm on the lookout for guests. So if you're passionate about DEI and would like to share your unique insights, experiences, or success stories, I want to hear from you. If you're a fellow podcaster who's passionate about DEI, let's swap the mic and amplify each other's voices. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out to me at Andrea@Diversifuse.com, and I'll send you the link to our guest interest form. Hope to hear from you soon. Remember, stay diversifused. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at Diversifuse.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts, tips, and events.